This is some notes on the Ten Commandments. Part 1, the Ten Commandments. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself a carved image or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and the fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing steadfast love to the thousands of those who love me and keep my commandments. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord your God is giving you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male servant, or his female servant, or his ox, or his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. Okay, some interesting things about this. Normally, when we think about the Ten Commandments, we think of two tablets, one with the first five commandments on it, and the second one with the second five commandments, or the last half on it. But actually, the Ten Commandments is part of a contract between God and Israel. Israel is the only nation in history that has ever made a contract with any deity, especially a deity that exists. And the Ten Commandments is a contract, and therefore there's two tablets because there's two copies of the contract. You can see in Exodus chapter 24, verses 7 through 8, where it says, Then he, that's Moses, took the book of the covenant and read it in the hearing of the people, and they said, All that the Lord has spoken we will do, and we will be obedient. And Moses took the blood and threw it on the people and said, Behold, the blood of the covenant that the Lord has made with you in accordance with all these words. So this covenant was signed with blood, and Israel said, all that you said to do, we will do it. And the problem with signing a contract is you have to stick to the terms. God has stuck to his terms, and so Israel must stick to theirs as well. So the Ten Commandments is part of a contract, and there are two tablets because there are two copies of the contract. And as you know, the second commandment is to not make any idols or graven images to worship, and they quickly disobeyed that. In fact, while Moses was up on the Mount Sinai receiving the Ten Commandments from God, they were falling into idolatry and gross immorality that usually goes along with the idolatry. A funny verse from this area, this is in Exodus chapter 32, and a funny sort of funny verse is in verse 24, when Aaron is making excuses, and Aaron said, Let not the anger of my Lord burn hot. You know the people, that they are set on evil, for they said to me, Make us gods, you shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. So I said to them, Let any who have gold take it off. So they gave it to me, and I threw it into the fire, and out came this calf. So that's a good way to shirk responsibility. I didn't make the calf. I just threw some gold in the fire, and this is what happens. But this sin snares the nation of Israel for many years to come. It does here during this generation, and Jeroboam repeated this sin in 1 Kings chapter 12. Commandment number 3 is you shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless who takes his name in vain. Taking the Lord's name in vain is only associated with saying cuss words that have God's name in it or his son's name in it when someone's angry or swearing or impressed or whatever is going on. And that's part of it, but there's more to it. From the Blue Letter Bible there, from the Strong's definition. The word for vanity or vain is in the sense of desolating evil, literally ruin, or morally, especially guile. Figuratively, idolatry as false, subjective, useless, as deceptive, objective, also verbally in vain, lie, lying, vain, vanity. So taking the Lord's name in vain is sure it has to do with careless cuss words, but it also has to do with saying that God approves of something that God doesn't approve of, which is sometimes heard among Christians when Christians say that they can do something that is obviously disallowed in the Bible because God has, gave them whispered it to them in a still small voice, or they were going to make a decision and they felt a peace that passes all understanding, and they knew it was from the Lord, something along those lines. I'm doing X, Y, and Z because God told me to. All of those things would be examples, especially if you're directly violating God's word, would be an example of taking the Lord's name in vain. An interesting thing about commandment number 4, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that is in them, and rested on the seventh day. So if you were to ever study creationism in Genesis chapter 1 and 2, there's books and books and articles on written how day doesn't have to mean day, and we don't know when the earth was created and all of this stuff. But here at Mount Sinai, God is speaking audibly to the nation of Israel, and he sets up the week for the Jews to follow, which is the same week that we follow, in reference to the creation week. And he doesn't mince words when he says, you shall work 6 days and rest on the seventh, because in the same way I, God, created everything in 6 days, everything, the heavens, the earth, the seas, and all that is in them. So that means heaven and earth means universe. So that's all the star in the sky. And all that is in them. So that's the stars in the sky and the animals and all the microorganisms and all of those things. God said he made them in 6 days and rested on the seventh. So that answers your question as to how to interpret Genesis 1. God gives it to us here just 2 books later. Okay, the last one relates to commandment 10, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. Another common thing is that people will say that the Old Testament deals with the outward man or the actions of people, and the New Testament deals with the inner man or the thoughts of people. But commandment 10 is a inner thing. Coveting, which is lusting or desiring someone else's stuff, is something that goes on within yourself. It's a mental attitude sin. It is not an action. It is not stealing. It's just wanting something that isn't yours. And it is banned here in Commandment 10. So it is not true that the 10 Commandments and or the Old Testament law does not deal with the heart. Coveting encapsulates a lot of things that we can do that would be considered sin in our mind. Okay, so that's part 1. This is part 2. Another interesting thing about the 10 Commandments is there's different ways in which you can divide it, and I'm going to focus on the chiastic structure of the 10 Commandments. This comes from Got Questions. A chiasm, also called a chiasmus, is a literary device in which a sequence of ideas is presented and then repeated in reverse order. The result is a mirror effect as the ideas are reflected back in a passage. Each idea is connected to its reflection by a repeated word, often in a related form. The term chiasm comes from the Greek letter chi, which looks like our letter X. So there are many chiasms in the Bible. My favorite probably verse in the whole Bible, or one of them, is Jesus talking in Mark chapter 2, verse 27, saying the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. This has many implications of relating to putting people first and not serving bureaucracy and all those other things. And that is an ABBA chiasm. Sabbath and Sabbath are A, and man is B. Got Questions also lists Joel chapter 3, verses 17 through 21 as an ABCXCBA chiastic structure. And then a website referenced on this presentation, which I don't think this fits, but I guess so. They say that Genesis 1 is chiastic, but it's an ABC structure. I don't think that really fits what a chiasm is, but it certainly has some poetic structure and parallelism. But as we've seen, just because it might have poetic structure doesn't mean what it says, which is that God made the heavens, the earth, the seas, and all that is in them in 6 days and rested on the seventh. So then coming to the chiastic structure of the Ten Commandments, it starts on the outside with commandments 1 and 2 grouped together as an entity in commandment 10, which is, honor, no other gods before me, don't make graven images, and thou shalt not covet. Those are connected. Then 3 and 9, don't take the Lord's name in vain, and don't bear false witness. Number 9, or thou shalt not lie. Then 4 and 8, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. And number 8 is you shall not steal. It's also interesting to point out that if you look at commandment 4 about the Sabbath, that is also a chiastic structure. That commandment by itself is as well. Then you go further into 5 and 7, and that is honor your father and mother, number 5, and you shall not commit adultery, number 7. And then in the center is commandment number 6, which is you shall not murder. So how does this chiasm look? 1 and 2 and 10 relate to idolatry. Commandment 2 says explicitly you shall not worship any idols. And Colossians 3, chapter 5 says covetousness is idolatry. So commandments 1 and 2 and 10 relate to idolatry. Commandments 3 and 9 relate to speech or telling the truth in what you say and what you do. Don't say God told you to do something that you want to do or that God did not tell you to do. And don't bear false witness against your neighbor. Don't lie in general. Commandments 3 and 9 relate to speech. Commandments 4 and 8 relate to trusting God for provision. So it's hard to rest for a full day every week. That is hard for business people. It was certainly hard in pagan cultures, or that the idea of a weekend was not developed. But one of the reasons in which you do it is because you trust God to provide for you, and you have a day set aside of rest to remember the provision that He provides. And that goes right with Commandment 8, which is you shall not steal. Those are both trusting the Lord for provision. Then Commandments 5 and 7 have to do with family. Honor your father and your mother, and you shall not commit adultery. So those are both related to family. And then in the middle, thou shalt not murder relates to life. So this is a pro-life message, and this is a way to have the kind of life that God wants you to have. Don't murder. Take care of your family. Trust God for your provision. Be honest in your speech, and don't submit to idolatry.